ash rides the wind like black snow. Men choke on it, coughing blood into their beards and broken helms. Somewhere a horse screams, thin and terrified, and is cut off as shadow passes over the Pelennor. The cry of a great bird splits the smoky sky, not a cry of rescue, but of hunger. Wings blot out the sun. Red eyes kindle through the haze. The sky itself has betrayed them, and an iron-crowned beak descends toward the White Tower. If you want more Middle-earth what-ifs told like this, leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss the next turning of the tale. And tell everyone in the comments where you are watching from, under what sky, and what it looks like tonight. Long before the first stones of Minas Tirith were laid, the great eagles had been named the messengers of Manwë, watchers set between cloud and peak, proud and perilous, never tame. They were not pets of the West, not steeds to be summoned with a whistle. They were their own people, ancient as the mountains they nested on. That truth remained. What changed was who they listened to when the wind carried a voice that was older than Sauron, older than the rings, older than the very shape of the world. The first sign was small, as all catastrophes begin. A silence where there should have been a cry. On the pinnacle of Orthanc, Gandalf the Grey stood in winter light that did not warm. The stone beneath his feet held the cold of deep places. Far below, Isengard lay like a black bowl, its ring wall hard with frost, its gates shut. He had been there long enough to measure days by the turning of the sun behind cloud, long enough to see birds avoid the tower as if the air around it stank. Saruman had spoken honeyed words until his patience had thinned into contempt. He had offered Gandalf a chair at the right hand of power, and when Gandalf refused, he had made refusal into imprisonment, as if it were a childish fit to be endured. Now Saruman waited, content, because he believed time itself belonged to him. Gandalf did not. Gandalf waited for another sound, one he had heard in war and in council, a cry like wind made sharp. He had spoken to a moth and sent it with a command that was not command, but plea. Somewhere, far above the tree line and the white peaks, the message should be answered. In the thin morning, a shadow crossed the stone. Gandalf lifted his face and saw wings. Relief touched him first, quick as sunrise. Then he saw the eyes. They were not the keen gold he remembered. They were embered, as if coals lived behind the lids. Soot clung to the feathers around the beak in a pattern like dried blood. The great eagle that came toward Orthanc did not circle, did not give salute or warning. It came in a straight line, the way an arrow flies. Gandalf's staff was in Saruman's keeping. His hands were empty, yet his voice remained. "Gwai here," he said, "because hope is stubborn, even when it is foolish. If it is you, friend, I am in need." The eagle's talons struck the pinnacle with a sound like iron hooks on stone. It leaned close enough that Gandalf could smell it. Smoke, old carrion, and something bitter like burned pitch. Around its neck, half hidden in feathers, glimmered a circlet of dark metal, not forged by any hand of the free peoples. The circlet bore tiny spikes that bit into flesh. Every movement of the bird pulled at it. The eagle's gaze did not soften. It spoke, and its voice was deep and hard, the voice of a cliff that breaks a ship. No longer. It seized Gandalf as gently as one might seize prey one wishes to keep whole. Gandalf's ribs creaked in the tightening grip. The world dropped away. Wind roared past his ears. Isengard dwindled beneath them. Gandalf twisted to look back, and in one of Orthank's high windows, Saruman stood, a white figure framed in black stone, watching with a small, satisfied smile. Saruman thought the eagle was simply refusing to serve the West. He did not understand what it meant to be delivered. Gandalf felt it in his bones as they crossed the white line of the mountains and flew not west toward Rohan and refuge, but east. East, where the land grew sallow. East, where the air tasted of old wars. East, where a lid of smoke sat upon the world like a hand closing over a candle. Below, wolves ran in the snow as if racing the shadow above them. Men in small, lonely steadings looked up and saw wings, and they did not know whether to pray or hide. In the wild places, orcs lifted their faces and howled in answer, for they knew the cry. By the time they reached the dark edge of Mirkwood, Gandalf's breath came in measured pain. He did not waste it on pleading. He watched. He listened. He stored away every detail, because even in capture he remained what he had always been, a mind that refused to stop moving. At Dol Guldur, where rot lay in the stones and spiders' webs clung like shrouds, and the eagle descended into a courtyard that had not seen honest sunlight in an age. The air there was warm with an unnatural heat, as if the very ground remembered fire. Black-clad shapes moved like insects in corners of vision. A gate opened without sound. Gandalf was carried into shadow, and the last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was the eagle lifting its head. For an instant, in the ember eyes, something flickered that might once have been shame. Far away, in the green quiet of the Shire, the same wind that carried Gandalf's last free breath moved through wheat and over hedgerows. It smelled of apples and earth. Children ran down lanes. Dogs barked at carts. In Bag End, Bilbo Baggins fussed over papers and poems, annoyed at being old, delighted at being alive. Frodo watched him with a love that was already threaded with loss. When the ring left Bilbo's hand, it did not feel like a turning of pages. It felt like a door closing on a warm room. The party ended. Night came. Gandalf did not. Frodo waited, and unease grew like a bruise. He did not know yet that a moth had died on the wind. He did not know that a wing beat had become a weapon. In Bree, under dripping eaves, strangers spoke in low voices about riders on the road. In the South Farthing, a farmer found his sheep clustered and trembling, staring at the sky. Over the Brandywine, fog rolled in thick as wool, and in it, something moved that was not fog. At the same time, in a high eyrie of the misty mountains where the air was so thin it made men's heads swim, the great eagles gathered. They came in silence, gliding in on currents that curled around stone. They landed with the heavy grace of creatures that belonged to heights. Their leader sat upon a flat of rock stained white by ages of droppings and bleached bones. The leader was large even for their kind. His wings scarred in places where old fights had torn feathers away and left notches in the span. His name had been spoken with gratitude by elves and dwarves alike. He had once carried a wizard from fire and ruin and asked no reward. Now he wore the iron circlet openly as if it were a crown. Gwaihir's beak opened, and the sound he made was not a cry but a statement. The old order is finished. Some of the eagles shifted. The younger one, eyes still bright and unclouded, clicked its beak in protest. We are of the wind. No one orders the wind. Gwaihir's gaze swept over them, and it held a weight that had nothing to do with size. "Do you think we have been free?" he asked, and his voice carried the edge of a memory that cut. "Do you think Manwë's gaze has ever left us?" "We were watchers, yes. Watchers are not kings. Watchers do not choose where to look." Another eagle spoke, older, wary. "And so you will trade one gaze for another?" Gwaihir lowered his head. And for a moment, the iron circlet caught the light, showing runes hammered into it, runes that hurt the mind to look upon. "This gaze does not ask us to be faithful. It asks us to be strong." There it was, the hook that had always been Morgoth's sharpest tool. Pride sharpened into resentment, resentment whetted into rebellion. Morgoth did not need to seduce all of them. He needed only to make their leader believe that obedience had been humiliation. And beneath words lay a darker truth that none of the younger eagles could know, because it had happened before their hatching. In the First Age, when the world was raw and great creatures still strode under the stars, Morgoth had taken eggs from an eyrie after a battle in the mountains. He had broken shells in his fist to hear the crack. He had left one unbroken, one life spared on a whim, and he had marked that life with an iron band set while flesh was soft. He had whispered into it as one whispers into a wound. He had promised it a sky without limits, if only it would never again kneel to the west. That life had lived. It had bred. It had led. Now the promise ripened into its harvest. When the council ended, the eagles rose as one, their wings beating dust and feathers into the thin air. They scattered like a storm, heading east and south, and becoming eyes for Mordor and talons for a war not yet declared. And in the high silence after they were gone, the mountains seemed suddenly less like guardians and more like prison walls. In Rivendell, Elrond Halfelven read the news in the faces of those who arrived. He heard it in the absence of one voice. Aragorn came first, travel-worn, carrying a burden of patience as heavy as his sword. He brought with him whispers from the wild, of black riders searching, and of strange birds seen at night that were too large to be owls, of shadows crossing the moon. Boromir arrived after a dream that had driven him north like an arrow. His pride sat on him like armor, even when he was unarmed. Legolas came light as leaffall, eyes troubled. Gimli came with a dwarf's stubbornness and a dwarf's loyalty, and also with news. In the high passes, dwarves had seen eagles that did not hunt goats, but hunted men. There should have been a wizard's laugh in the valley, and a staff tapping stone, smoke rings drifting above the Bruinen. There was only the sound of water and the creak of trees in wind. When the council gathered, and at last the tale of the ring was told, Elrond listened to each voice as if weighing stones in his hand. He did not hide his worry. "Mithrandir has not come," he said, and even the name sounded like a prayer that did not reach its god. Frodo sat among them, small, his hands cold in his lap. The ring hung on a chain at his neck, and even through cloth its weight pressed like a secret. They spoke of Sauron, of Mordor, of the eye that searched. They spoke of sending the ring west over sea, and all knew without saying that the sea was closed by more than distance. They spoke of hiding it, and all knew without saying that there was no hiding from a power that had learned patience over ages. Then a question rose like smoke from a hearth. What of the eagles? Boromir asked it first. Because men under siege are quick to seize any tool. Why can we not bear it on swift wings to the fire? He said. Why take such a road on foot, bleeding at every step? Elrond's eyes turned, not to answer, but to search the faces of the wise for the one who usually answered such questions with gentle scorn and deeper truth. No one spoke. It was Legolas who broke the silence. The eagles are not ours, he said softly, and in the north they have changed. Gimli grunted. Birds do not change. They are birds. Legolas' gaze did not leave the air beyond the open arch, where a cloud drifted like a slow ship. They are not birds, he said. And yes, they change. I have heard their cries. They sound like iron. Frodo felt, without understanding why, a chill, as if a door had opened behind him onto a dark hallway. If the sky could be trusted no longer, what was left? The decision came, as it always did in the end. The ring must go to Mordor, carried in secrecy. Not because the road was good, but because all other roads were worse. So the Fellowship was named, 9 to match the 9 riders of the enemy. They set out with winter biting at their heels, and hope held like a small flame cupped in hands. Elrond watched them go with the expression of one who has seen too many endings and knows that every beginning is already cracked with sorrow. Above the pass of Caradhras, snow fell thick as feathers. In the canon of the world, Caradhras had always been a mountain with a will, and its will had always been suspicious of strangers. In this turning of the tale, its suspicion was guided. As the Fellowship laboured up the slope, wind screaming around rock, Aragorn felt it first, a pressure in the air that was not weather. He stopped, lifting his face into stinging snow. Legolas, whose eyes were made for distance, narrowed them. "What do you see?" Boromir demanded, teeth clenched, pride bristling at any delay. Legolas' voice was tight. Wings. They came out of the white like knives. Great shapes diving, pulling up, diving again, their wing beats slamming air into the faces of those below. Snow exploded in sudden plumes as talons struck. A boulder rolled where it had not been loose a heartbeat before. One eagle swept low enough that Frodo saw the iron circlet on its neck and the embered eyes that did not blink against the storm. The Fellowship scattered instinctively, seeking shelter behind rock that offered none. The birds did not strike to kill quickly. They struck to drive. Gimli raised his axe and shouted something in Khuzdul that was more curse than prayer. Legolas loosed arrows that vanished into whiteness. Aragorn's sword flashed once, useless against air. Then one of the eagles screamed, and the mountain answered. A slab of snow broke free above them with a sound like tearing cloth and became an avalanche. For a moment, it felt like the end of all tales. White erased everything. Frodo was rolled, crushed, suffocated. Boromir's shout became a muffled gurgle. Sam's hand clawed for Frodo and found only cold. Pippin, buried, thought absurdly of a warm kitchen and the smell of mushrooms, and that thought hurt more than the snow. Aragorn, battered and half-buried, forced himself upward. He found Legolas first, because elves are hard to kill, and together they dug for the others with bleeding hands. They found Boromir's arm, then his face, purple with lack of air. They dragged him free. They found Sam, coughing, eyes wide. They found Merry and Pippin clinging to each other, shaking like leaves. They did not find Gandalf, because Gandalf was not with them. They did not find safety above the snow line either, because the eagles circled, watching, waiting for movement. Aragorn looked down the slope toward the dark line of trees and the black mouth of the Dimrill Dale. He made a choice that tasted of defeat. "We go under the mountain," he said. "Moria." The word was a curse, a memory of doors shut and friends lost. Gimli's face tightened in pain and duty. "There is death in those halls," he said. "There is death above as well," Aragorn answered, and the simple truth of it settled like another weight on their backs. As they descended into the shadowed valley, the eagles followed at a distance, never close enough for arrows, never far enough to be forgotten. Their presence made the air feel watched. Every time Frodo looked up, he saw a circle of darkness moving against grey cloud, and his heart beat faster, as if trying to outrun its own fear. At the doors of Durin, when the moonlit lake lapped at stone like a tongue, they spoke the word and entered. The doors swung soundlessly, and the darkness swallowed them. In the deep halls, their footsteps sounded too loud. Moria smelled of old dust and cold stone, but beneath it lay another odour, faint at first and then stronger, a burnt tang like ash in a closed room. Gimli's eyes darted over carvings, over broken stairs, over shadows that seemed to move when no one moved. "There is fire here," Legolas whispered, and his voice had none of the usual wonder in it, only dread. They found Balin's tomb. They read the record of death scratched in haste. Drums began, far away, and their sound was the heartbeat of a beast waking. Orcs came like ants from cracks in the walls. The battle that followed was brutal and close. Swords rang on iron, axes bit into flesh, arrows flashed, hobbits huddled against stone, stabbing at whatever came too near, eyes wide with terror and determination. In a tight corridor, an orc spear thrust toward Frodo's chest. Sam threw himself in the way, and the spear scraped across the mithril shirt with a shriek of metal. Frodo gasped, feeling the bruise blossom anyway. He saw Sam's face, pale and furious. "You will not take him," Sam snarled, and in that moment, the ordinary gardener from the Shire looked like something older and fiercer than the mountains. They ran, always running, until the air itself seemed to run out. On the bridge of Khazad-dûm, they faced what Gimli had smelled. A Balrog, flame and shadow bound together, a relic of Morgoth's first wars. It stepped onto the bridge with the slow certainty of something that had waited a long time to be called. Without Gandalf, there was no staff raised, no command in a wizard's voice that made even ancient evil pause. There was only Aragorn, sword in hand, eyes reflecting fire, and behind him a line of exhausted companions. Legolas' breath caught. Gimli's fingers tightened on his axe until knuckles went white. Boromir whispered, as if to himself, "So it is true. The old terrors are not dead." The Balrog's whip cracked, fire snapping like a living thing. It lashed toward the Fellowship. Aragorn shouted, "Back!" and drove forward, slashing at the whip as if steel could cut flame. It could not. The whip wrapped around Aragorn's sword arm. He cried out as heat seared flesh through cloth. The Balrog pulled, and Aragorn staggered toward the edge. Boromir moved without thinking, because pride and love can look alike when the moment demands it. He seized Aragorn from behind, bracing his feet against the stone. For an instant, he held. Then the bridge shook. stone cracked. The Balrog's weight pressed down like doom. Boromir looked once over Aragorn's shoulder, and his eyes met Frodo's. "Do not waste it," Boromir said, and there was no time to explain what he meant, whether it was his strength, his life, or his hope. The bridge broke. Boromir fell with a shout that turned into silence as the darkness swallowed him. The Balrog fell too, dragging fire into the abyss. The whip snapped free, and Aragorn collapsed, arm burned, breath ragged. The sudden quiet that followed was worse than the drums. It was the quiet of a story that had lost one of its strongest voices too early. Merry began to sob, small and broken. Pippin covered his mouth with both hands, as if to keep his own fear from escaping. Aragorn pushed himself up, face grim with grief he could not afford. "Run," he said, because there was nothing else left to do. They escaped Moria bleeding and fewer, stumbling out into starlight like corpses crawling from a grave. The cold night air tasted of freedom and guilt. They did not see the eagles at first. Then Legolas looked up and swore softly in Sindarin. Above the trees, wings moved against the stars, slow and patient. Lothlorien received them like a dream that could not last. Golden leaves whispered overhead. The air smelled of Malorn's sap and clean water. For a few days, the world seemed to remember beauty. Galadriel looked into each of them with eyes that did not judge, but did not excuse. When she turned her gaze upward, toward the canopy, and beyond it, toward the unseen sky, her expression tightened. "The air is watched," she said, "not only by the eye." Aragorn's burned arm throbbed under bandage. "The eagles," he said, and it tasted bitter in his mouth. Galadriel's voice was quiet, yet it carried as if the very leaves leaned in to listen. "They were sent as messengers," she said, "and now they bear other messages." Frodo, lying awake at night under the soft rustle of leaves, heard distant cries on the wind. Sometimes he could not tell if he was awake or dreaming, because the cries slid into his mind and became images. An iron crown sinking into flesh, a great wing beating against smoke, a white tower burning while birds circled like thoughts of death. In the morning, he went to Galadriel's mirror. He did not ask to see the Shire, though longing pulled at him. He asked instead, "Why?" Galadriel's hands hovered over the water, pale above dark surface. "Do you ask why the sky has betrayed you?" she said. "Or do you ask why anything betrays anyone?" Frodo swallowed. "They were good," he said, and it sounded like a child's argument against winter. Galadriel's gaze softened, and that softness was more terrible than hardness. "Good is not a chain," she said, "nor is it armor. Even the high may fall if pride finds a crack." In the mirror, water rippled, and an image rose, a tower of stone, black and tall, and above it a ring of wings. Not Nazgul on fell beasts, but eagles, larger, older, their feathers edged with smoke. They circled not as guardians, but as wardens. Frodo felt cold spread through him. "Can they see me?" he whispered. Galadriel did not answer immediately. She watched the water, and in her silence lay a terrible honesty. "Some can," she said at last, "and some do not wish to, but they cannot look away." That was the first planted question that refused to leave them. Cannot? When the Fellowship left Lorien, and now broken into smaller threads by death and necessity, the story itself seemed to split like a river around stones. Frodo chose to go on, because the ring pulled him toward its ending with a gravity that did not care who died along the way. Sam went with him because Samwise Gamgee had made loyalty into a kind of law. They slipped away in a small boat, paddling through mist, leaving behind Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli on the far bank. Aragorn watched the boat vanish and felt the weight of choice settle like a cloak. He was the heir of kings, yes, but what was a crown compared to the small figure carrying doom into enemy land? How many lives were being spent to buy that one chance? And if the sky itself hunted them, what chance remained? Legolas, hearing again the circling cries above, said, "We are being driven like deer." Gimli spat into the river. "Then we will show them antlers," he growled, but even his bravado had a crack in it. They did not know yet that Merry and Pippin, on the far side of the woods, were being hunted too. When orcs took them, it was not chaos as it had been in other tellings. It was coordination. Uruk-hai moved like soldiers, not raiders. Above them, in the grey afternoon, a single great eagle circled, watching the ground with ember eyes. When the hobbits tried to break away in the confusion, the eagle dipped, cried sharply, and the orcs shifted instantly to cut them off. Merry tasted blood where he had bitten his tongue. Pippin's wrists burned where rope bit. Both could smell the orcs, sweat, leather, rancid meat. But over that stench lay another, carried down from above when the eagle swooped low, smoke and iron. "The birds," Pippin gasped, half choking as an orc jerked the rope. "The birds are with them." Merry, in pain, managed a bitter laugh. "It figures," he wheezed. "Even the sky has turned. The orcs drove them toward Isengard. Saruman believed his net was closing neatly. He did not see the larger net above his own. In Rohan, the grasslands lay under a leaden sky. The wind smelled of damp earth and horse, and also, faintly now, of smoke. Theoden sat in his hall like a man already entombed, eyes dim under Grima worm tongues, whispering. Eowyn moved through the golden hall with the quiet anger of one watching a loved one die slowly. She listened to men speak of war as if it were weather. She watched the door day after day for a grey-cloaked figure who did not come. When at last riders arrived with news, they brought not hope, but terror. "A shadow passed over the Westfold," one said, voice raw. "Not cloud. Wings?" Theoden stirred as if from sleep. "Eagles?" he rasped, and for a heartbeat the old stories lit his mind. The rider's eyes filled with a fear that made him look young. "Not ours," he said. "They took men from the walls as a man takes fish from a stream. They dropped them from high places for sport." Eowyn felt her stomach twist. She stepped forward. "How many?" she demanded. "Too many," the rider whispered. Outside, the wind changed. The horses in the stables began to scream, a sound that set teeth on edge. Men ran to doors and looked up. Eowyn looked too. High above Edoras, 3 great shapes glided, perfectly still, as if the air itself held them up out of respect. They were so large that for a moment, her mind refused to accept what her eyes saw. Then one folded its wings and dove. The sound of its cry struck the hall like a thrown spear. Men flinched. Theoden's head lifted, eyes widening in something like recognition. The eagle hit the roof with talons that punched through thatch and wood. Its weight collapsed a beam. Straw and dust exploded downward. Another eagle swooped low across the courtyard and seized a guard in its claws, lifting him as easily as a child lifts a doll. The man's scream rose, thin and desperate, then ended abruptly as the eagle's beak snapped. Éowyn drew a sword. The blade looked absurdly small against the vastness above, yet she did not lower it. "To the hall," she shouted. "Shelter the king." The eagle on the roof tore at the building like a wolf tears at a carcass. It was not simply killing it, was unmaking the idea of safety. In the chaos, Wormtongue slipped away like a rat, smiling faintly to himself. He had not summoned this. He did not need to. The sky was already doing Saruman's work. Days later, in Fangorn, Treebeard listened to the story of Merry and Pippin with eyes like deep wells. His anger was slow, but when it arrived, it shook leaves from branches. "Many have come with axes," he rumbled. "Now they come with wings." Ents moved. The forest stirred with a wrath older than Rohan. They marched on Isengard with the inevitability of nature reclaiming what had been stolen. For a time, it seemed like an ending. Water broke Saruman's walls. Stone cracked. Trees pushed through iron. The great ring of Isengard became a ruin, and Saruman, trapped in Orthanc, raged like a cornered serpent. Merry and Pippin, filthy and bruised, sat on a broken stone and laughed weakly as they drank clean water for the first time in days. Pippin held his cup in both hands, feeling warmth seep into his fingers. "We did it," he breathed, wonder and disbelief mixing. Above them, the sky darkened. A sound like thunder rolled down, not from clouds, but from wings. A flock of great eagles swept in, more than anyone had ever seen together. They came low over the treetops, their shadow racing across the water. Treebeard lifted his head. He said, slow even now, but his voice held something new. Fear. The eagles did not attack the Ents with talons first. They attacked with fire. From above, they dropped bundles that burst on impact, spilling a sticky, burning substance that clung to bark and leaf alike. Fangorn had known fire before, but not like this, not falling from a sky that should have carried rain. Flames climbed trunks, hungry and fast. Smoke billowed, thick and black, turning day into twilight. Ents bellowed, a sound like mountains grieving. They beat at flames with great hands, but the fire stuck, crawling. An Ent named Bregalad, whom the hobbits had called Quickbeam, rushed into the blaze to pull saplings free. A burning bundle struck his shoulder and clung. He roared and staggered, and as he fell, fire raced along him like a living thing. Merry's eyes stung. Pippin coughed, tears cutting tracks through soot on his face. "Treebeard!" Pippin cried. "We have to go!" Treebeard stood amid smoke, watching his forest burn. His deep voice came out rough, stripped of its slow calm. "The world is changing too fast," he said, and it sounded like despair. That was another turning point, another moment that felt like the story might end in ash. Isengard was broken, yes, but Fangorn was wounded, and Saruman, in his tower, laughed as if the pain of trees were a joke. In Minas Tirith, Denethor sat with the Palantir, his hands trembling slightly though no one saw. The stone showed him what Sauron wished him to see. Endless hosts, black banners, the sea of Nurnen feeding armies, and above them, wings. Denethor's mind, sharp as a blade, seized upon the detail that cut deepest. "They have the sky," he whispered. Faramir entered quietly, smelling faintly of the rain that had fallen earlier, bringing with it the comfort of clean stone. He saw his father's face and felt his own heart sink. "What have you seen?" Faramir asked, and his His voice held the careful gentleness of a son speaking to a wounded pride. Denethor's laugh was brittle. "I have seen what you refuse to see," he said. "The West is alone. Even the messengers of the Elder King have turned. What hope does Gondor have, when the very air is enemy?" Faramir stepped closer. "Hope is not a thing that arrives on wings," he said. "It is a thing we make, with swords and hands and endurance." Denethor's eyes flashed. "Endurance," he repeated, tasting the word like something sour. "Is that what you call waiting to die?" Faramir did not answer, because he could not lie to his father, and he could not bear to speak the truth that was already growing in both of them. In the Dead Land near Mordor, Frodo and Sam felt the change in the world as a physical pressure. The air grew heavy, as if reluctant to move. The ground turned from green to brown to grey. The smell of growing things faded, replaced by dust and the faint, constant reek of sulphur. They travelled by night, sleeping by day under roots and rocks, because above them wings passed often. Sometimes Sam would wake and see a shadow slide across their hiding place, and his hand would clamp over Frodo's mouth to keep him from breathing too loud. Once, in the early dawn, they lay under a thorn bush on a bare hillside and heard voices above them. Not orcs, not men, eagles. Their speech was harsh, full of clicks and deep vowels, but Sam caught fragments because fear sharpens attention. He heard the name of a place, Cirith Ungol. He heard another word repeated, halfling. Frodo's eyes were wide in the dimness. He mouthed without sound. "How?" Sam shook his head slowly. And he did not know. He only knew that something vast and ancient was hunting them, something that did not tire, something that could see far and fly faster than any horse. They reached Ithilien like beggars reaching a rich man's gate. The land there was still beautiful, even under the shadow. Herbs grew, water ran clear. The air carried the scent of crushed bay leaves when they stepped on them. The beauty hurt. It felt like being reminded of a life they were losing. Faramir found them, not by chance, but by the careful watching of a captain who knew his land. He did not seize the ring as his brother might have. He listened. He fed them. He asked questions that revealed his mind as much as theirs. When Frodo spoke of the eagles turning, Faramir's face tightened. "We have heard of it," he said. "A patrol was taken from the walls of Osgiliath by wings in the night. Only one man returned, broken in body and wits. He said the birds wore crowns." Sam's fists clenched. "Crowns," he muttered, as if the Dark Lord needs more crowns. Faramir looked at Frodo, and in his gaze lay a sorrow that did not feel like pity, but like kinship. "You are walking into a world that is closing," he said quietly. "If the air is their ally, then secrecy is your only shield." Frodo managed a small nod. "Secrecy," he whispered, as if the word itself were a prayer. When they left Faramir, he watched them go with the expression of a man watching a candle carried into a storm. In Rohan, the storm broke. Without Gandalf to wrench Theoden free from Wormtongue's poison, the king's strength ebbed. The riders were scattered. The Westfold burned. Refugees streamed toward Helm's Deep, eyes hollow, carrying bundles that smelled of smoke and fear. Eowyn rode with them, not as a sheltered lady now, but as a shield maiden in all but name, her face smeared with dust, her hair bound back. She saw children crying from hunger, old men limping with bloody feet, women carrying cooking pots like treasures. Above, the sky was never empty. When Saruman's army came, it came not merely with ladders and torches, but with wings. The great eagles swept over the deeping wall and dropped stones like siege engines. Each impact shuddered through the ground. Men on the battlements were knocked from their feet. Some were lifted bodily and carried away, their screams fading into the night. Aragorn stood on the wall, his burned arm aching, his sword hand slick with rain. He saw the battle turning against them, not through lack of courage, but through lack of possibility. How did one hold a wall when the enemy could simply fly over it? Legolas loosed arrows until his fingers bled. Some struck true. An eagle shrieked, feathers bursting, and fell into the darkness. For an instant, hope flared. Then 3 more took its place. Gimli fought in the breach when the wall broke, axe rising and falling in rhythm with his breath. He was laughing at first, a harsh sound, because dwarves sometimes laugh when death is near. Then a shadow covered him. He looked up and saw talons descending. He swung his axe upward. It bit into scaled leg. The eagle screamed and jerked back, but its other talon closed around Gimli's shoulders. It lifted him off the ground. Gimli's boots kicked. His hands clung to the axe embedded in flesh. For a heartbeat, he hung, suspended between earth and sky. His eyes met Legolas across the chaos. And in that glance lay years of rivalry turned into something like love. "Tell them," Gimli shouted. And whether he meant tell his people, tell the world, tell the story, no one could know. The eagle yanked free, tearing the axe from its own leg, and rose into the rain with Gimli struggling in its grasp. Legolas screamed Gimli's name, a sound rawer than any battle cry he had ever made. Then the eagle released. Gimli fell into the darkness beyond the wall. There was a distant final impact, and the laughter was gone. Helm's Deep fell by morning. The survivors fled into the hills like hunted animals. Saruman did not even come to claim his victory in person. He did not need to. The sky had done what armies could not. That was the third ending that was not an ending, the moment when it seemed the story of men might simply stop, not with a noble last stand, but with a collapse under something as indifferent as weather. Yet even then, threads continued to move, because in Middle-earth, endings often only reveal the shape of the next struggle. In the ruins of Isengard, Saruman stood at Orthank's window, watching smoke rise from distant Fangorn. He believed himself clever. He had allied with darkness and used it to break his rivals. Now he intended to bargain with Sauron as an equal. He sent his voice, smooth and persuasive, through the Palantir. On the other end, in Barad-dûr, Sauron listened. Sauron did not answer with words. He answered with wings. One night, as Saruman paced his tower, the air outside changed. A cold wind rose, carrying the smell of Mordor, and the sound of many wingbeats approached like an approaching sea. Saruman went to the window, and his heart, which had been too proud to fear, stumbled for the first time. The eagles came, not circling, not hovering, but slamming into Orthank's stone like battering rams. Talons scraped and sparked, beaks struck. The tower, which had stood since the days of Númenor, shuddered. Saruman shouted, "Fools! I am Saruman the White." But his voice, which once could bend minds, broke against something harder than will, the iron command that bound the birds. A crack appeared in the stone near the window, thin as a hair. Then another. The eagles struck again and again. stone began to crumble. Saruman backed away, robes dragging. He reached for spells, for power, yet the tower itself betrayed him. Because Orthanc was built for endurance against men, and not against the relentless patience of creatures that could attack from angles no siege had ever considered. When at last the wall gave way, an eagle thrust its head through the gap, eyes glowing like coals. Saruman stared into them and saw no mind he could manipulate, only a hunger for obedience fulfilled. His scream echoed down the tower as talons closed on him. In the morning, Grima Wormtongue, hiding among rubble below, found feathers scattered like burnt leaves. He found blood. He did not find Saruman. He laughed softly, a nervous sound, and looked up at the empty window. "Even you," he whispered, "even you were not chosen." So fell the one who had thought himself the center of the web, killed not by heroes, but by the very tool he had welcomed. Betrayal, it seemed, was contagious. In Minas Tirith, the siege began under a sky that never cleared. The city smelled of stone and sweat, of fear held tight in bodies that could not afford to tremble. Soldiers stood on walls with numb fingers on spear shafts. Citizens huddled in doorways, clutching children. The white tree stood in the court of the fountain, its branches bare, a symbol of a line that felt like it might end. Denethor walked the halls like a man already mourning. Faramir rode out to hold Osgiliath as long as he could, because duty is sometimes the last thing that keeps despair from becoming action. When Faramir returned, wounded, the city's mood cracked. Denethor saw his son carried in, pale as ash, and something inside him snapped like a rope under strain. "Bring wood," Denethor ordered, voice flat. "Bring oil." The servants froze. "My lord." Denethor's eyes were empty. "The world will burn," he said. "We will not wait to be thrown from a wall by talons." Faramir, semi-conscious, murmured something, a word that might have been father. Denethor did not answer. Outside, the first stones of Mordor's siege engines struck the walls. The impact shook dust from ceilings. The city's heartbeat became the rhythm of war. Then came the wings. The great eagles descended over the Pelennor like a dark flock of judgment. Their cries turned men's blood cold. They did not merely attack soldiers. They attacked the city itself, dropping burning bundles onto rooftops, tearing at banners, ripping away the bright symbols of Gondor as if to erase memory. On the lower levels, a baker named Iorlas shoved his children under a table as the roof above him caught fire. Smoke poured down, the smell of burning bread mixed with pitch and hair. His youngest began to scream. Iorlas clamped a flour-dusted hand over the child's mouth, tears streaking through soot on his cheeks because he had heard what happened to those who cried too loud. On the walls, a young guard lifted his shield as an eagle swept low. The talons punched through wood as if it were paper. The guard felt himself lifted. Wind tore at his face. The city fell away beneath him. For a heartbeat, he saw the white tree from above, small and fragile, and he thought of his mother's hands on his hair when he was a boy. Then the eagle released him, and the world became a rushing roar. This was the hook made real, the searing image spreading through the city like fever. The sky had betrayed them, and it did not even hate them enough to kill quickly. In the midst of it, a small relief arrived, almost unnoticed. The Witch King was delayed. The Nazgul could not dominate the air as easily when something older and larger ruled it. For a brief, strange moment, Gondor's men did not have to hear the fell beast's shrieks. They had to hear eagles instead, and that difference, absurdly, felt like mercy. Aragorn did not come with the dead, because the paths of the dead had become a trap. Eagles watched the entrance like sentries. The dead could not be frightened from the air. Even the Oathbreakers were bound to roads and tunnels, to earth and stone. The sky remained the enemy's. So Aragorn came another way, with a remnant of Dúnedain and whatever men he could gather from the coasts. He came in ships under cover of night, sails dark, oars muffled. As the fleet approached the Harland, a shout rose from the prow. Wings! Aragorn lifted his head and saw them, silhouettes against a bruised dawn, coming fast. His jaw tightened. "Archers!" he commanded. "Ready!" The first eagle struck the mainmast with talons that tore wood. The mast cracked. Sail billowed and collapsed. Men screamed as rigging snapped and whipped like lashes. Aragorn ran along the deck, sword drawn, cutting ropes, trying to keep the ship from capsizing as weight shifted. A second eagle landed, its talons crushing planks, and seized a sailor in its beak, snapping him in half with a casual jerk. Blood sprayed the deck, a bright and shocking against wet wood. A third eagle dropped a burning bundle onto the stern. Fire blossomed, smoke poured. The ship became a torch. Aragorn realized, with a cold clarity, that this was not a battle he could win. He could not outfly a creature of the air. He could only endure. "Abandon ship!" he shouted, and his voice cut through chaos like a blade. "To the water! Swim!" Men plunged into the river, armor dragging them down. Some surfaced, coughing, eyes wide. Some did not. Aragorn leaped last, sword still in hand, because even in the water he refused to be unarmed. The Anduin was cold enough to steal breath. He fought to the surface, gasping, and saw above him an eagle's face, eyes glowing, watching him like a judge. It did not strike. It simply watched, as if savoring the helplessness of a king without a kingdom, a hero reduced to a struggling man in black water. Then it turned away, because there were larger prey. On the far bank, soaked and shaking, Aragorn gathered what survivors he could. They were too few. Minas Tirith burned in the distance. The sky, full of wings, was closed. For a moment, even Aragorn's will faltered. How could any man fight a war when even the air was enemy? What did it mean to be a king in a world where crowns could be hammered onto the necks of beasts? In Mordor, Sauron watched all of this through many eyes. Some eyes were orc, some were Nazgul, some were burning orbs in his tower, and some, now, were the ember eyes of eagles that circled high over the world, reporting with cries and gestures as they had once reported to Manwë. In Dol Guldur, Gandalf sat in chains, and the darkness around him was thick as cloth. He had been questioned not by orcs, but by a presence that made the air itself feel heavy. Sauron did not need to appear in a fair form. His will filled the room like smoke. "You send your pity into my land," the voice said, echoing without echo. "You send halflings with secrets. You send kings without crowns." Gandalf lifted his head, eyes dull with exhaustion but not broken. "And you send eagles with iron around their throats," he rasped. "That is your triumph, slaves in the sky?" A low sound, almost laughter. "They chose," Sauron said. Gandalf's lips tightened. "Did they?" he asked, and though it was not spoken as a rhetorical flourish, it hung in the air like a blade. Or did they inherit a chain so old they mistake it for their own pride? Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. Then, unexpectedly, another voice spoke from nearby, deep and strained. It was an eagle, chained as well, smaller than the ones Gandalf had seen, feathers ragged. Its eyes were not embered. They were pale gold, dulled with pain. "They cannot refuse," the eagle whispered, and each word sounded like it cost blood. "Not while the crown remains." Gandalf turned his head slowly. "What crown?" he asked, though he already knew, and the knowing felt like ice in his chest. The eagle's beak trembled. "Iron," it said, "forged in the first darkness, set on the first of us that Morgoth spared. It is in our blood now. It sings when the dark calls. It hurts until we answer." Gandalf closed his eyes briefly. In that instant, many earlier questions found their answer. Why the ember eyes? Why the obedience? Why the strange reluctance in one bird's flicker of shame? They were not simply traitors. They were prisoners of a curse that had learned how to breed. Sauron's presence pressed closer. "You see," it said, "even their pain serves me." Gandalf opened his eyes again, and something in them sharpened. "Pain is not loyalty," he said. "Chains are not crowns, and even a curse can break." Sauron's laughter returned, colder now. "Then break it," the voice said. "But you will not. You have no wings." In that taunt lay the cruelest truth. The West had relied too long on rescue from above, and on unexpected deliverance. Now deliverance had become predation. In the high passes, Gwaihir led his flocks with a soldier's discipline. He did not sleep easily. Sometimes, in the thin hours before dawn, memories came unbidden. Carrying Gandalf from Orthanc once, hearing his gratitude lifting dwarves from burning trees, circling above the battle of 5 armies, and turning the tide against goblins. Those memories felt like another life. And yet, they stung as if they were still attached. He told himself it did not matter. He told himself strength was the only law. He told himself Manwë had never loved them, only used them. And yet, when the iron circlet bit into his flesh and the dark call pulled at him, there were moments when he wondered, not quite daring to form it into a full thought. If he had been free, would he have chosen this? In Mordor's wastes, Frodo and Sam crawled like insects across a land that wanted them dead. Then they passed under the Morannon and found no way in. They saw armies marching, heard the clank of armor, smelled the sweat of thousands. Above, eagles circled like living watchtowers. They turned south toward the pass of Tirith Ongol, because desperation is a compass that points only toward whatever is not yet closed. There, Shelob waited, and in this tale too, she hungered. When Shelob struck, it was sudden as darkness. Frodo went down with poison in his veins, eyes rolling back. Sam fought with sting, and with a courage that felt like madness. He drove the spider back, screaming her name, as if naming her could make her smaller. Then, as Sam knelt over Frodo's limp body, the air filled with the sound of wings. Sam looked up and saw an eagle land on a rock above the pass, eyes burning. It did not attack immediately. It watched as if considering. Then it cried once, sharp and commanding. Orcs poured from the tower like a spill of ants, drawn by the signal. Sam's mind raced, and in that frantic moment, the idea that had once been a joke in taverns became a knife in his gut. The eagles were not a hope. They were the enemy's heralds. Sam seized the ring from Frodo's chain with shaking fingers. He pressed it into his palm, feeling its cold malice. For a heartbeat, the temptation to put it on surged, because invisibility felt like the only shield left in a world where even the sky watched. He did not. He clenched it so hard it hurt and whispered, "Mr. Frodo, do not leave me." The orcs came. Sam fought until his arms shook. He killed one, then another. A third struck him from behind. Stars exploded in his vision. He went down, tasting dirt. Above, the eagle watched, and if any pity lived in it, it did not show. Orcs seized Frodo's body, assuming him dead. Sam, half conscious, was dragged too, because even in defeat, his grip on the ring had been seen, and Sauron's servants were not fools. As they hauled him toward the tower, Sam's last clear thought was not of heroism, but of the Shire. A summer morning, sunlight on green fields, and the sound of a kettle singing. He wondered if he would ever smell grass again. This was the fourth near-ending, the moment when the ring-bearer and his companion were both taken at the very edge of Mordor, when the last fragile plans seemed to snap. Yet the ring itself, treacherous and cunning, did not wish to return to Sauron by such a simple path. It wanted drama. It wanted a fall that would feel like fate. In the tower of Cirith Ungol, orcs fought over Frodo's belongings, snarling, stabbing, arguing. In the chaos, Sam woke, head pounding, and listened. He heard the voice of an orc captain shouting orders. He heard another voice, higher, panicked. He smelled blood and sweat, and the sour stink of fear. Sam's hand found a small object in his pocket, a bit of elven rope, unnoticed by the orcs in their greed. His fingers, clumsy with pain, worked at knots. He slipped free, inch by inch, because in this world even hope had to crawl. He found Frodo alive, stripped and pale, shivering in a cell. Frodo's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then locking on Sam with a shock that almost broke him. "Sam?" Frodo whispered, voice cracked. "Is it you? Or is it another trick?" Sam's throat tightened until he could barely speak. "It is me," he said, "and I am getting you out, even if I have to bite every orc in the tower." Frodo tried to smile and failed. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "The sky," he murmured. "Sam, the sky is watching." Sam helped him up. Frodo was light as a bundle of sticks, his strength eaten by poison and fear. Together, they slipped through corridors, avoiding snarling orcs as they fought each other. They moved like shadows in a place that belonged to shadows. On the tower's upper walkway, cold wind hit them. For a heartbeat, Sam thought freedom was close. Then, a great shadow swept overhead, and the iron-edged cry split the air. Frodo froze, trembling. Sam pulled him down behind a crenellation, heart hammering. Above, against the stars, an eagle hovered, wings beating slowly. It was so close that Sam could see the iron circlet glint, could see the raw skin beneath it. The eagle's head turned, scanning, eyes searching. Frodo's hand crept to the ring beneath Sam's shirt. "It knows," Frodo whispered, voice thin with terror. "It knows." Sam's jaw set. "Then it will have to catch us on the ground," he hissed. "Come on." They ran, hunched low, downstairs, out a side gate, and into the black land. Mordor greeted them with a wind that tasted of ash. The ground crunched underfoot, not with stones, but with brittle slag. Far away, Mount Doom loomed like a wound in the world. Its red glow pulsed faintly, as if the earth had a fever. Above them, wings moved. The final quarter of the tail tightened like a noose. Every step toward the mountain felt like walking deeper into a trap that had been set long ago, perhaps even before Frodo was born, perhaps even before the Shire existed. Sauron's armies were drawn out toward Minas Tirith, yes, but his Sky Watchers were everywhere, and unlike armies, they could pivot in an instant. In Minas Tirith, Denethor lit his pyre. Servants pleaded, guards hesitated. Faramir lay unconscious, breath shallow. The city shook under impact and flame. Outside, the cries of men and the shrieks of eagles mingled into one sound, a chorus of a world ending. Denethor stood over the wood, holding a torch. His face was streaked with tears he would never admit were tears. "Better to burn by our own hand," he whispered, "than to be torn apart for sport." At that moment, a great crash shook the hall. A stone had struck nearby. Dust rained from the ceiling. The torch flame flickered. And in that flicker, Denethor saw, as if in a vision, the white tree's bare branches against a sky full of wings. He lowered the torch slightly, hand trembling. Relief touched him for a heartbeat, because death would be simple. Then disquiet followed, because even death now felt like surrender. "Father," a voice rasped. Faramir's eyes were open, unfocused, but alive. He looked at Denethor with the helpless honesty of a wounded man. "Do not," he whispered. Denethor stared. The torch trembled. The flame licked upward, hungry. A servant, emboldened by Faramir's voice, stepped forward and seized Denethor's wrist. Another joined him. Denethor struggled weakly, then stopped, as if exhausted by his own despair. The torch fell, hissing as it hit stone, and went out. For a brief moment, in the midst of siege and betrayal, something like relief entered the world. The steward did not burn his son. A small mercy, a tiny hinge on which fate might still turn. But outside, the city continued to burn anyway. On the slopes of Mount Doom, Frodo and Sam climbed on hands and knees. Sam's breath came in wet gasps. His legs shook so badly he could barely stand. Frodo stumbled often, his face grey, eyes fever-bright. The ring's weight had grown monstrous, not in pounds, but in meaning. It pulled at Frodo's neck like a noose that tightened with every step. Above them, the sky rumbled. An eagle's cry echoed off the mountain, and this time it was close. They reached a ledge and collapsed, pressing themselves against rock. Sam looked back down the slope and saw movement. Not orcs yet, but wings descending, shadows growing. Frodo's lips moved soundlessly. His mind, fraying, formed one clear thought. There would be no rescue at the end of this road, only teeth and fire. Then, unexpectedly, a figure appeared above them, scrambling down with the agility of hunger. Gollum. His eyes gleamed in the red light. His fingers flexed. His mouth opened in a grin that showed broken teeth. "Thieves," he hissed. "Thieves in the Dark Lord's land. Precious told us. Precious showed us." Sam lurched up, raising sting. "Go away!" he shouted. His voice cracked. "Go on, get!" Gollum's gaze flicked to the ring beneath Frodo's shirt. His whole body trembled. "Give it," he whispered. "Give it back. It is ours." Frodo stood swaying. He looked at Gollum with something like weary hatred. "It was never yours," he said, and the words surprised even him with their coldness. Gollum's face twisted. He sprang. Sam and Frodo grappled with him on the narrow ledge, all three slipping, claws and hands scrabbling for purchase. Below them, the mountain dropped into red-lit mist. Above them, wings beat the air, closer now, the sound like a giant heart. An eagle landed on a higher outcrop, talons clacking on stone. It leaned forward, watching, its head tilted as if curious. Sam saw the iron circlet. He saw blood at the base of it, fresh. He realized with a sudden, sick clarity that the eagle was not merely hunting, it was suffering. "Why are you doing this?" Sam shouted up, not expecting an answer, because in the face of despair, even questions become weapons. You were supposed to be the good ones. The eagle's ember eyes locked on him. For a heartbeat, Sam thought he saw something else beneath the red, something like gold struggling to be seen. Then another eagle landed beside the first, then another, a line of wings, a wall of sky made flesh. And among them, larger than the rest, came Gwaihir. He landed with a heavy grace, his iron crown gleaming darkly. His gaze swept over the three small figures and fixed on Frodo. The ring called to him too, not with desire, but with the sharp pull of a command. Seize it, end it, bring it to the eye. Gwaihir stepped forward. His talons scraped stone. His beak opened. Frodo's hand went to the ring, as if of its own will. He felt suddenly that all of this had been leading not to a choice, but to an inevitability. His heart pounded. His mouth went dry. Sam moved in front of him, shaking, sword held out like a child offering a toy against a storm. "You will have to go through me," he said, voice hoarse. Gwaihir looked down at him, and for the first time in a long while, he spoke not as a soldier, but as a creature, remembering it had once been something else. "You are brave," he said, and there was no mockery in it. "Why?" Sam's eyes filled with tears that the heat dried before they could fall. "Because he is my mister." "Frodo," Sam said, "because this is wrong. Because if even the sky cannot be trusted, then what is left of the world?" Gwaihir flinched, a small movement, but real. The iron circlet bit. His feathers rustled as if a wind passed through them that no one else felt. Behind him, one of the other eagles clicked its beak sharply, impatient. The command of Mordor pulsed through the air like a drumbeat. Gwaihir's voice dropped. "We cannot refuse," he said, and the words sounded like confession. Sam swallowed hard. "Then break it," he whispered, and his voice carried a fierce simplicity that no law could complicate. "Break the crown." Gwaihir's eyes narrowed. He looked past Sam to Frodo, to the ring. He looked for a heartbeat, as if he might lunge and end it. Instead, he lifted his head and screamed. The scream was not a hunting cry. It was a challenge. In that instant, the dramatic irony completed its circle. The chain could be inherited, the curse could be bred, but obedience had never been the same as loyalty. And as somewhere inside even the crowned leader, something had been waiting for the right pressure, the right question, the right small act of defiance to crack the old lie. Gwaihir surged forward, not toward Frodo, but upward, slamming into the eagle beside him with brutal force. Wings tangled, feathers exploded, talons slashed. Two great bodies rolled on the stone, fighting like storms colliding. The other eagles shrieked, confusion rippling through them. The command pulled them one way. Their leader's sudden rebellion pulled them another. For a heartbeat, the sky faltered. "Run!" Sam shouted, grabbing Frodo's arm. Frodo stumbled, dragged toward the opening of the Samath Nar. Gollum, forgotten for an instant, crawled after them, eyes wild. Above, eagles fought eagles, the air filled with feathers and blood. One crashed down the slope, broken-winged, screaming until the scream became a wet gurgle. Inside the cracks of doom, heat wrapped around Frodo like a living thing. When the air shimmered, the fire below roared like a beast. Frodo stepped to the edge, swaying. Sam stood behind him, sobbing now, because the end was here, and it was too much and not enough all at once. Frodo's hand closed on the ring. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to gold and fire. Then Frodo turned, and his eyes were not Frodo's anymore. "I will not do this," he said, voice calm, almost relieved. "The ring is mine." Sam's heart stopped. "No," he whispered. "No, mister. A Frodo." Frodo slipped the ring on his finger. Outside, Sauron's attention snapped toward the mountain like a whip cracking. The eye turned. The air itself seemed to scream. Gollum shrieked with a sound of pure hunger and joy. He lunged at the invisible Frodo, grappling, biting, clawing. Sam swung blindly with Sting, shouting, but he could not strike true. Then, in a sudden, horrible clarity, Sam saw it. Gollum, dancing on the edge, ring in hand, having bitten it off along with Frodo's finger. Gollum's face was rapturous. He held the ring up like a star. "Precious," he crooned. The ground trembled. A roar rose from the mountain's depths. Gollum took one step back, and there was nothing behind him. He fell, his scream cut off as fire swallowed him, and the ring with him, gold vanishing into red. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the world broke. Barad-dûr shook. The black gate shuddered. Towers cracked like old bones. The eye that had watched the world for so long flared, searching, disbelieving, and then went out as if a candle had been snuffed by a giant hand. Outside the mountain, the eagles froze mid-flight, as if the air itself had changed texture. Some screamed and plunged as if suddenly blind. Others spiraled upward, freed from a pressure they had not realized was constant. Gwaihir, bleeding, his iron circlet bent and twisted, fell to one knee on the stone, wings dragging. He lifted his head toward the sky, as if expecting to see Manwë there, or Morgoth. I saw nothing at all. What he saw was emptiness, and that emptiness felt like relief. Minas Tirith felt it too. In the White City, in the midst of flame and rubble, men paused as if waking from a nightmare. The great eagles above faltered, their formations breaking apart. Some fled east, shrieking in confusion. Others landed hard on rooftops, panting, heads low, as if suddenly exhausted by centuries. A soldier on the wall, soot-streaked and half-made with fear, looked up and began to laugh, a cracked sound that turned into sobbing. "They are gone," he whispered. "The pressure is gone." Relief spread through the city like cool water, brief and astonishing. Then disquiet crept in behind it, because the fires still burned, the dead still lay in streets, and the sky, though no longer an enemy's tool, was not suddenly friendly. The eagles did not turn into saviors again. They were wounded creatures, freed too abruptly, their minds raw with the sudden absence of command. Some, leaderless and hurt, attacked anything that moved out of reflex. Others fled into the mountains, disappearing like storms that had passed but left destruction behind. In the days that followed, the world revealed what it had become. Rohan's plains were dotted with blackened farmsteads. Helm's Deep stood broken, its stones scorched. Theoden lay dead in his hall, killed not by a blade, but by falling beam when an eagle tore the roof apart. The Rohirrim who remained gathered under Eomer, their faces carved by grief. Eowyn, bruised and smoke-stained, looked out over the grasslands and felt as if the wind itself had changed. It still smelled of horse. It also smelled, faintly now, of burned feathers. Gondor's walls held barely. Denethor lived, but something in him had died. He walked the city like a man haunted by his own near surrender. Faramir recovered slowly, and in the gentleness between father and son, there was a new, fragile honesty, born from the fact that despair had almost won, and had been stopped not by triumph, but by a whispered, "Do not." Aragorn was crowned not in a city of shining marble, but in a city of scaffolds and ash. When he stood before the White Tree, he saw not a symbol of unbroken lineage, but a living thing that had endured smoke and fire. He laid his hand on its bark and promised, quietly, not glory, but rebuilding. His voice carried no melodrama. It carried fatigue and resolve. In the Shire, the war arrived late, as it often does, not with armies, but with scars carried home. Sam returned with Frodo, and the sight of green fields hit him like a blow. For a heartbeat, relief flooded him so hard he had to sit on the ground and press his hands into grass to prove it was real. The air smelled of earth and spring. Birds sang. The simple sound nearly broke him. Then he noticed the emptiness in the sky. No great shadows crossed the sun, and that should have been comforting. Instead, it felt wrong, like a missing tooth in a smile. Sam found himself flinching when a crow flew overhead, absurdly expecting iron-crowned talons. Frodo walked the lanes like a man half in the world and half elsewhere. He smiled at familiar faces. He listened to gossip. He sat in Bag End and stared at the hearth as if expecting to see Mount Doom's fire in it. One evening, as the sun set, Frodo stood on the hill and looked east. His finger, missing its tip, ached in the damp air. Sam stood beside him, hands in pockets, trying to be steady. "We did it," Sam said softly, as if saying it louder might break it. Frodo nodded. Relief touched his face briefly, and then something else slid in beneath it, a disquiet that would never fully leave. "Yes," he said, and the world did not end. Sam frowned. "Is that not good?" Frodo's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "It means we have to live in what comes after," he said, "and that is sometimes harder, far away." In the misty mountains, Gwaihir lay in an eyrie under open sky. The Iron Crown had been torn in the battle on Mount Doom's slopes. Pieces of it still clung, embedded, and the wounds festered. Younger eagles circled nearby, uneasy. Some looked at him with reverence, some with resentment. None knew what they were now that the command was gone. Gwaihir stared upward at clouds moving like slow ships. He remembered being a messenger. He remembered being a weapon. He did not know which memory was more painful. A small eagle, eyes pale gold, landed beside him. It was the one who had spoken to Gandalf in chains, though Gwaihir did not know that. It lowered its head, not quite bowing, not quite accusing. "The dark voice is silent," it said. Gwaihir's beak opened slightly. His voice came out rough. "And still the crown hurts," he said. The smaller eagle looked toward the west, where the world was clearer. "Maybe it always will," it said. "Maybe freedom is not comfort." Gwaihir closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw a white tower under ash, men screaming, and his own wings blotting out the sun. He saw Sam's tear-filled eyes and heard the words, "Break it." He opened his eyes again to an empty sky, and for the first time in ages, he did not hear a command in the wind. He heard only wind. So the tale ended, not in clean triumph, but in a world battered into humility. Men learned that no ally is guaranteed, and not even one that once seemed ordained by the Valar. Elves, dwindling, carried this bitter lesson into the West with them. That pride is the crack through which even ancient blessings can be poisoned. Dwarves, counting their dead, remembered Gimli's last shout and spoke his name in halls that echoed with loss. Hobbits went back to gardens and tried to believe that small things still mattered, because without small things, the great victories were only rubble. And above it all, the sky remained vast, indifferent and haunted by what it had been. On a quiet morning in Minas Tirith, after the fires were finally quenched and the stones cooled, a single black feather drifted down from nowhere, turning slowly as it fell, and it landed at the foot of the white tree like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence the world was afraid to read.